So this summer at the Henderson household was an unusual one in that my older son, I have two boys, my older son was heading off to his first year of college. I have to make sure not to fall off this stage. That would be very embarrassing. He was heading off to his first year of college, and that meant that my younger son, and this was the beginning of August when he was leaving the house, and my younger son, who was about to begin his junior year of high school, was not going to start until the beginning of September. So we had about a 1-month gap where we were semi-empty nesters, where it was just my wife and I and my younger son. And like a lot of families, we typically do a vacation in August. So we thought, well, we'll do a vacation in August. And we thought, well, since Peter, our younger son, hadn't had this opportunity before, we would ask him where he might like to go. So Peter thought about it for a minute and he said, what would be kind of fun would be to take a road trip and, maybe we could go see some of those iconic cities of the Midwest. And I said, iconic cities of the Midwest, what in the heck does that mean? And he said, well, like Pittsburgh and Cleveland and Chicago and Detroit, those places. I said, well, I've never heard anybody call them iconic before, but okay, yeah, those are interesting places. And in the back of my mind, of course, I was thinking, well, this sounds like work in a way. So what I do for a living, I go to these sorts of cities and visit them. But I do know they're interesting. And as it turned out, neither Peter nor my wife who's pretty well traveled, had ever been to Pittsburgh or Cleveland or Chicago or really even Detroit. Even though I'm a Michigan native and we'd been to Michigan a number of times, Detroit was always the place that you flew in and out of, but we didn't really visit. So I said, why not? Let's do a road trip. And so to prove to you that A, I have no shame, and B, this is real, I brought some slides that we took along the way, not knowing I was going to give a speech about this 3 months later. So what I want to do is talk to you for a little bit about, sort of send a love letter to the cities of the Midwest, the iconic cities of the Midwest, and tell you a little bit about what we saw. But really not what we saw, what they saw. Because of course I'd been to all these places before, but they hadn't. And so we looked at these places through a slightly different set of eyes. And you can advance those slides as often as you want. I'm not going to watch behind. I'm not going to take you through a tour of these slides, but you'll get a chance to see my big shining face in a few selfies. So what did they see? What did they see? They first saw that these are beautiful places, which, the riverfronts in Pittsburgh, the waterfront here in Cleveland, the beautiful Art Deco buildings, obviously Chicago and the river. These are beautiful places, and that's something of a surprise. It was something of a surprise to them because, of course, what do you hear when you're not visiting these places? You hear about decline, the Rust Belt, you hear all kinds of things. So they saw beauty, and they were surprised by that. The second thing they saw was culture. A lot of what we saw and did revolved around cultural experience. Silly things like, what do you eat when you come to these places? Any variety of hot dog and sausage and heaping mounds of French fries and tall sandwiches with certain kinds of bread and chili and all kinds of things that after 2 weeks of it, you do need to go through a cleanse. But I mean, you got a lot of dose of culture there, but also the formal culture. I mean, buildings like this are representative of the fact that there is a lot of culture that is part and parcel of what you experience when you come to these places, both old and new. The third thing that we saw, what they experienced, was the presence of history. And history in a couple of senses. First, these are cities of neighborhoods, and we spent a lot of time in neighborhoods, seeing different neighborhoods, and this is representative of the waves of immigration and sort of enculturation over more than a century in these places. Really, the story of the United States is here in these places. But also history in the economic sense. Of course, this is the Rust Belt. This is the older industrial cities. These are the iconic cities that are part of the sort of economic expression of the United States. And that was very, very evident there's Cleveland, very, very evident to them as they experienced these places. And then the last thing that they saw and experienced was a sense of optimism and opportunity. There was stuff happening in these places. It was palpable to a visitor. This was much different than their image of these places before we came to them. So, of course, that's what they saw. But I've been to these places, and so I know a few things too. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about what I know. So what do I know? I know that what they experience, particularly that last piece about optimism and opportunity, is not an accident. It's actually the product of lots and lots of work that we're going to be talking more about the rest of this afternoon. And that work has been done by committed nonprofit organizations, neighborhood-based groups, by philanthropy, and if nothing else, those cities I named, this region has an embarrassment of philanthropic riches. These institutions have remained committed to the cause alongside sometimes excellent, sometimes not excellent civic leadership in the form of mayors, but they have been working, toiling away for 10, 20 plus years to try to pivot from decline to growth. And one of their central insights is one that we're here to talk about today, and that is there was untapped potential in these places in the form of what we now call anchor institutions. And those anchor institutions, if they could be partnered with, if they could be encouraged, could actually help unlock a different way, a different pathway for these institutions as they moved forward. So I want to talk to you a little. I'm not going to describe what anchor institutions are. I think all of you know more than I do about them. But I want to talk about a couple of things related to anchor institutions that are worth keeping in mind. First is these educational institutions, these hospitals, these universities, colleges, what have you, that we call anchor institutions are different from other kinds of organizations because they have a mission orientation. They care about more than just their own individual institutional health and bottom line. They actually understand that their success is intertwined with the success of the community around them. They haven't always understood this as well as they might, but now they're beginning, and particularly here in Cleveland, they understand that these two things are inextricably linked. This creates a real source of power. It creates a real source of long-term thinking that really has been able to create change over time. The second thing I think that relates to this, how can I forget, is about leadership. Because when institutions are oriented in this way, they actually seek out and cultivate leaders who also care about more than just the narrow institutional health, the narrow health of their institutions, but actually about how they as leaders can continue to cultivate the role, the outward-looking orientation of their institutions over time. And this can be reinforced by the fact that once this begins to generate success for these institutions, it becomes something that they want to repeat. So that leaders that are attracted to these institutions and thrive and succeed there are succeeded by yet other leaders who continue the same pathway. The second thing I think we want to remind ourselves is when we're working on this anchor institution set of initiatives, what is it that we're really working on? We're working on poverty. We're working on the effects of poverty. And the Greater University Circle Initiative has been at it for 10 years and has only begun the work that needs to be done over time to deal with the impoverishment, the extended impoverishment of the citizens of Cleveland and beyond. And the thing that I think we have to name and own is that in American cities, poverty and race go hand in hand. And so this is really also about race and equity. And so the anchor institution work really is about continuing to address those problems over time. So those are a couple of things that I know. I've got a couple of minutes left, and I want to tell you about what we should be thinking about in the next 10 years. 3 things: culture, jobs, and demographics. So we're in a cultural institution. I think all too often in the work that we all do in cities and in communities, we think of culture as the nice to have, not the have to have. We do culture once we've figured everything else out. But as I said to you, in our experience as a family traveling in these places, in these cities and these iconic cities of the Midwest, culture is what you experience. Culture is an amazingly important asset of these communities. So owning that culture has to be at the center of your conversations, not on the periphery. And this is both in the sense of the cultural expression of community, but also in making sure that the leadership of cultural institutions are at the table, are helping to create the solutions to the long-term problems that we're working on in the anchor institution space. So culture matters. Cultural leadership matters. Jobs. So obviously, one of the things we're concerned about when we work in the anchor institution movement is about creating more jobs. And I would just encourage us to think not just about jobs, but about the quality of those jobs. And there's a lot of really interesting work that's been done in Cleveland around improving the quality of the jobs that are available through the work of anchor institutions. But this remains an important strategy over time. This is about who owns businesses. It's about what those wage rates are for laborers. It is about what are the benefits packages that go along with it. It's about using the tools of creating better jobs to lift entire communities from being poverty stricken out of that. So we don't have as many working poor in the future as we have now. And anchor institutions have both the wherewithal to do this within their own institutions, but also to use their influence in their community, in their city, in their state, and eventually nationally to make improving the quality of jobs normal, not the exception. Finally, demographics. Majority minority country in the next 25 years or so. Many of our American cities are already majority minority. Diversity is a fact of life in the United States. And finding a way to make sure that our growth is inclusive, using our work in the anchor institution movement and beyond to embrace that diversity as a source of strength, not as a problem, to find ways to make sure that the innovation that we're creating is spreading in communities is a critical task. It is the critical task to make sure that the United States is successful in the coming 100 years, as successful as it has been in the last 100 years. That's it. I do want to do one thing before, I can't do it because I forgot my phone. I was going to take a selfie of all of you and put that on the internet because it has been so exciting to give a Fred talk to all of you, to kick off this great conversation and to celebrate. We're going to do one on this phone. Okay, everybody ready? I want you all to smile. All right. Whoa, we got to reverse the screen. There we are. Okay. All right. I'll tag all of you. Don't worry. I want to thank you all.